who doesn't know the problem when you have a position and you have so many different options how to decide? And in my very first example, I would like to give you some tips in order to find candidate moves more quickly and, well, something like what you should pay attention to in order to, well, get a successful list at the end. Here in this example, McShane against Achterstein. Achterstein was to move and he chose to play the move knight e5, which didn't lead anywhere but in a worse position eventually, because black is here a pawn down, so he better needs to do something in order to, well, either equalize or get back to track. When we look at this position, before of course we count the candidate moves, what is very useful is to look for tactical indications. What do I mean with tactical indications? I mean, for example, unprotected pieces or semi-protected pieces or pawns. Like what I mean with semi-protected, for example, when the knight is one time attacked and one time defended, or the pawn on h2 is one time attacked and one time defended, especially when a piece or pawn is defended by the king. This piece or pawn becomes even more, well, let's say important, because when a king protects something, then of course there's always, or there might be some danger related. So apart from looking for these kind of indications like unprotected pieces or pawns, for example, a4 is unprotected, b2 is unprotected, but at the moment we don't really attack it, and semi-protected pieces like the knight on d4 or the pawn on h2, what else we should pay attention to? When we look at this position, we should also see that there is a weakness of a back rank, especially the square d1 is not protected. Also the square a1 is not protected, but objectively it's hard to reach a1, so we should pay attention to d1. But what else? And here comes something which a lot of players may not pay attention to: when pieces are either in a row, in the diagonal, or in a file. Here, for example, we can witness that white has a kind of coordination problem. The pieces, the bishop, the queen, and the knight are in one file. So that means when pieces are, or a lot of pieces, and it doesn't matter of what color, well, but in general, when there are a lot of pieces in a row, in a diagonal, or in a file, it's an indicator for patterns like skewers or pins. And that means here, for example, when we look at this coordination, it's clear that there may be a pin somewhere along the d file. So now we counted already all tactical indications which may be weak in white's camp. So let's sum up the candidate moves. We mentioned at the beginning h2 and d4, so the move queen e5 automatically becomes a candidate. Then we mentioned the weakness on d1, and okay, connected with h2 leads us to queen h5 as one candidate. Well, of course, always when we calculate variations, we should look for the captures, but I don't see any benefits here. So that's why I wouldn't really assume knight takes d4 as a candidate, but we can, of course, shortly look into it. And last but not least, how can we exploit something connected with a very bad coordination? That leads us to queen d7 and queen d8. So we can agree that these are the candidate moves we should, well, pay attention to. And now what we should do when we have a lot of candidate moves, we should start to exclude them one by one. Let's start with the move queen e5, because we mentioned it at the beginning. With queen e5, of course, also like a tactical problem, a tactical indicator arises in black's camp, because the knight now on c6 is unprotected. And the main question white should ask is whether there is a mating threat on h2. And well, asking this, of course, the answer is clear. There is not, because after knight takes c6, queen takes h2, king f1, queen h1 check, and king e2, there is nothing black gained but losing a piece and therefore the position. So for this reason already queen e5 can be ruled out. Despite that, also knight f3 might be a useful candidate move. However, knight takes c6 is much stronger. So let's check the move queen h5. That is more interesting because here we also have a look at the square d1 and h2. The easiest way of preventing it is once again to play something like knight f3. However, also worth, of course, taking into consideration is knight takes c6, because, well, after queen d1 check, there is queen f1. However, here the problem is when the king protects the queen, and it's the only piece doing that, and we already know that h2 is a tactical weakness, then here this is not going to end well for white because of bishop takes h2. But as we already mentioned, knight f3 solves the issue and black gained nothing. Now queen d7 or queen d8, and once again we should take a decision on that, and here once again it's very good to use tactical indicators. The queen on d7, for example, is not protected. The queen on d8 is protected, but of course we can also say on the contrary, the knight on c6 is not protected after queen d8, and after queen d7 it is. However, one more thing, when the queen goes to d7, apart from the fact that the queen is not protected, also we have queen and knight in one diagonal. And we mentioned at the beginning that when pieces or more than one piece is the diagonal row or file, there are always some issues about skewers. Okay, here we don't have a white bishop or pins. And this already, like queen d7, would get us, for example, to a move like queen b5, which is available. The other thing is, instead of queen b5, also the fact, because the queen on d7 is unprotected, means that here queen f5 is a possibility, and this would also, well, at least solve the issue in a way that white should be worried. Queen d8 has only the drawback that the knight on c6 is unprotected. But after knight c6, actually, we anyway win the piece, the queen here with bishop takes h2. So that's why actually taking on c6 is never an issue. And here the advantage is, since the queen is on d8, it's not in interference with the knight on the diagonal, as I already mentioned, and it's not in interference with the square on f5, because on d7, as I said, the queen was unprotected. So that leads us eventually to the last move to be checked, queen d8. All the other candidate moves we already ruled out. Now the threat is very simple. We threat to take, and to take on h2. That's one threat. The other threat is basically to play bishop c5 or bishop e5 and to pin the queen on d3. For example, if bishop c3 or even bishop e3, then the easiest solution is always, let's say, bishop c5. I mean, bishop e5 may work as well, but once again, on e5, the bishop is more, let's say, shaky. On c5, it's a protected square. So when we have a choice and, well, we see that one choice looks more stable, it's usually the first preferable choice. Of course, we should observe whether there are drawbacks, but here bishop c5 is actually efficient. Bishop e5 instead of bishop c5, here we have to watch out for queen to e4. This actually may still be working because there are some captures and captures here, and there's a mate on d1, so I don't think it makes a difference. Similar like with bishop e3, there's bishop c5 and bishop e5, but always I would use bishop c5 because I have to calculate less. Here, for example, there's once again queen e4, which we can calculate, but the easiest solution is here to take with a knight, because after queen takes e5 there is a check followed by queen d1 mate. So anyway, here in this example, I think it doesn't really matter, but well, in general, it's good to pay attention not only to tactical indications like weaknesses in your opponent's camp, but also tactical indications in my camp. And with the help of looking for exactly these things, like unprotected pieces or pawns, like semi-protected when they are one time attacked and one time protected, and for example pieces in a row diagonal of file, this is always a hint that there is some tactical issues or that there might be a tactical problem, and this can definitely help to make a successful list of candidate moves.